Tao, or Dao in Vietnamese, is an ancient concept introduced in the early days of civilization and is part of the gems of Eastern philosophies. Taoist sages build their attitudes on the idea of Tao as an absolute, essential, without form or name, mysterious and indescribable truth. According to the Taoist concept, people can achieve a perfect life without excessive effort, stress, and anxiety. Since ancient times, Taoists adopt to live in harmony with the Tao or the Way. They integrated into their celebration rituals that drew cosmological concepts of yin-yang principles. They interpreted phenomena that affected their lives according to the I Ching Book of Change or Kinh Dịch to cultivate themselves following the alternating cycles of nature. In practice, the Taoist philosophy can manifest as feng shui or geomancy for a harmonious balance between the positive and negative energy for healthy living and longevity, including Zen meditation combined with Buddhist mantra for clarity of the mind and positive thinking. Tao practices in the cult of deities are similar to the Vietnamese ancestral worship celebrations that combine paying respect to both Buddha and self-cultivation on moral and ethical behavior, showing gratitude to spiritual mentors and living in harmony between siblings. Kinship relations, the love of the land and being responsible for the welfare of family members and relatives are the ethics equivalent to patriotism. These values are taught in the Confucian codes of conduct and family rules, which are abundant in Vietnamese literature. In particular, Lý Văn Phúc Nhị Thập Tứ Hiếu, The Story of 24 Obedient Sons, a manual inspired by Chinese teachings on filial piety, was widely used as a classic textbook for education for many generations of Vietnamese. In a sense, Taoism differs from Confucianism by not emphasizing rigid rituals and social order. However, it still shares Confucian teachings in achieving perfection by becoming one of the unplanned rhythms of the universe called Tao or the right way. Similarly, Vietnamese modes of celebration, such as keeping a vegetarian diet or other spiritual practices according to the moon cycle in praying to the Buddha and paying respect to the deceased parents and relatives, are considered ethical conduct. In the Vietnamese vocabulary and daily prayer, the God Creator is called Ông Trời or the universe. And as the Creator is omnipresent and can watch or punish, all our actions must follow the ethical principles of good behavior or thiện, and avoid unethical conduct or act based on the Buddhist karmic principles. Confucian and Han Viet education were present in Vietnam until the beginning of 20th century. Therefore, the question here is not about why Vietnamese need to study classic Chinese literature, but rather how much Confucianism has influenced the education system in Vietnam for over 1,000 years. With the conversion to Western education, the old school protagonists and traditionalists were not trying to oppose the new system. Still, they criticized a too abrupt change in rejecting old values and traditions and abandoning the practice of Confucian values such as filial piety, loyalty, integrity, and benevolence. In doing so, they have contributed significantly to preserving the harmony of society and families in times of transition. Buddhism is perceived as a philosophy because its open mindset and high tolerance for other schools of thought. To many Vietnamese, Buddhism is also a religion as it has its religious rituals and dogma and has been practiced by the majority of the people under different forms of worship. Among the classics on Buddhist practice in Vietnam, Dao Duy An's work once more showed his profound knowledge of the Buddhist mind. His introduction to Zen studies in China and in Vietnam is a precious source for research on Buddhist practices during the Middle Age days of Vietnam. Through his translation of Kinh Trần Thái Tông Buddhist book Khóa Hư Lục, he's very accurately assessed the influence of Zen Buddhism on great authors of classical Vietnamese literature such as Nguyễn Trãi, Ngô Thời Nhịp, and Nguyễn Du. Reference Trần Thái Tông, Đào Duy Anh, Khóa Hư Lục, Nhà xuất bản khoa học xã hội, 1974. According to Trần Trọng Kim, the Tam-giao tradition strongly influences Vietnamese spiritual life. While Taoism preaches non-violence, Buddhism teaches us to avoid suffering by distancing ourselves from all possible sources of suffering caused by the senses or the emotion arising thereof that leads to positive or adverse reactions. The positive emotion is defined as thiện or constructive, whereas the negative emotion is defined as ác or destructive, which leads to suffering or dissatisfaction. One of Buddhism's main characteristics that attracts many followers is its interpretation of change as the impermanence of life. Not accepting this fundamental concept will lead to suffering from deception, disappointment, and despair when a change occurs in your life, such as the separation of your loved ones, a downturn in your social status, or a loss of material benefits, feelings of insecurity, etc. The Dalai Lama named these feelings destructive emotions. Therefore, Buddhism encourages cultivating oneself immune to the change when it occurs. Through the practice of meditation, one can stabilize one's mind, and through observing rituals such as a diet for a certain period in the year, being vegetarian or vegan, practicing the 5 precepts such as do not kill, do not lie, do not steal, do not indulge in immoral practice, and do not abuse harmful substance according to the Eightfold Path rules or Bát Chánh Đạo, will help to stabilize one's temperament. Zen meditation combined with mantra, a form of prayer, is part of the exercise that helps create awareness of the fluctuations of your emotional states. Deeper philosophical concepts of these emotional fluctuations are analyzed regarding chemical reactions of yin-yang elements according to Taoist interpretations, or hormonal responses according to modern psychoanalysis methods. As Buddhist practices vary per region and culture, they are not equally practiced in the same manner in each part of the exact location. Therefore, the practice that was imported through the silk trade routes by Buddhist monks and traders has more characteristics of Southern Buddhism as compared to the influence of Chinese translated scriptures that came by way of literary education. The Buddhist impact also changed depending on the political decisions of certain kings who made Buddhism the national religion and some others who chose Confucianism as the way of governance. As a philosophy, Buddhism is integrated into the studies of philosophy and religion in some curricula, especially for the training of monks. The University of Vạn Hạnh is currently the reference for such training. Unlike Thailand or Burma, where the influence of Buddhism is still evident, Vietnamese monks and nuns are administered by the state and have to earn a living in society, but continue to practice their faith in the pagodas or temples. Most are regarded as spiritual mentors and loved by their exemplary conduct of life. Temples or pagoda are sacred places where people from all walks of life could just come in and receive free food and shelter when they are in trouble. The pagoda is also a place for worship of the dead and assures the role of social assistance or conflict resolution between parties or people in distress. With its 1,000-year history in the heart of the Vietnamese people, Buddhism still occupies an important place in Vietnamese arts and literature. As Vietnamese people are now scattered all over the world, it would be impossible to assess the full impact of Buddhism on Vietnamese thinking. However, some research works may help to deepen understanding of Buddhism and its influence in Vietnam. Venerable Mate Short's Story of Buddhism in Vietnam, Vietnam Phật giáo sử lược, written in 1943, is a good introduction that gives a systemic understanding of Buddhism's early history in Vietnam. In conclusion, if Tao is the way in Eastern societies, Confucian values and Zen Buddhist practices are part of the legacy that remains in minds of modern Vietnamese today. Looking back on the impact of Eastern philosophies have on the philosophy of education that has accompanied Vietnam's modernization process, the values of the three religions tradition are most visible in literature, arts, and music that characterize the Vietnamese spirit and so until today. Revisiting the legacy of pre-war educators such as Đào Duy Anh and Trần Trọng Kim that marked the generations of the post-colonial period reminds us of the huge impact that education can bring to transforming a whole society and advance humanity. End of part 1.